why don't you tell us who you are, what your channel does, and how people can find you?
Cool. See, I like you. You know how to get it done. I talk to some people and they don't do that. But you can call me Jolah. I do progressive commentary. I'm only 20 years old. Right now, I'm currently finishing my public policy degree. It's a master's degree at the current moment. I'm planning to run for state senate in the state of Pennsylvania. That isn't a dox. I don't consider it a dox. I know Mike from PA has PA in his name, and then he gets confused that people know he's from PA. But no, I'm going to be running in Pennsylvania in 2022 at the age of 22. So I do like progressive commentary, some bread tube stuff, and I'm really focused on political like communications. So how to package policy, how to take things that everyone talks about, because I see a lot of academic terms being used. Like for instance, white privilege, defund the police. I like taking those things and I'm thinking like, okay, how can we sell these concepts to the most people and be really effective in politics? And that's why I was really interested when I saw your conversation with Destiny, because he is awesome on Twitter. That is true. He really does. Like when it comes to people on the left, he just
He gets
wants it.
really mad.
Oh
He
yeah,
gets so mad.
he wants it. He feeds off of that. That's like there's introverts and extroverts. Destiny, he has it in his like bio or whatever. From being like abrasive, that's where he gets his energy from. It was the post about like what it means to be like free. So if education and food are human rights, what does it mean to be free? Is that free at the point of service, or is that free like just different even means testing programs to make sure everyone can have it? But there's a couple things I wanted to talk to you about, because
Sure.
I watch a couple of videos on your channel about you go really deep into like socialist theory, like the difference between Marxist socialism or I had a kid call into my channel once. He was a Trotskyist or whatever, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know any of these terms. I'm from the normie world. So like when
Mm-hmm.
you're doing that stuff, when you're learning all of these terms and talking about these terms, like how do you formulate that into a world where regular people don't understand that? Like how do you package it in a completely different way? Is this just a thing you do online, or like?
If so, I've said this a few times. If I were going to run for state office, and I suppose that I would like eventually to do that, yeah, maybe I'll follow your path and get a master's first. Are you getting you said you're 20 and you're getting a
Well,
master's?
I'm doing like so my university has a 5 year program,
Oh,
and I have a lot of credits from doing community college, so it'll be like
I
4.5
see.
years total, which is a good money saver.
Yeah, still a big brain. Okay, I appreciate it. I am not so big brain. Just getting a. I'm graduating with a BS in like a week or two, I guess. But eventually, I guess maybe masters run for office. Definitely, I would try and package it as like what some terms people use are like oh, human-centered capitalism or like whatever it is that Yang says,
Yeah.
stuff like that. Definitely, I would try to repackage it. Generally, this is a conversation I was having recently. So there's lots of like terms that like the old school Marxists use, and I don't consider myself much of a Marxist. However, just even talking about those, I think that you can get quite a bit about messaging. So, for example, some people basically the way that Marx conceives of like government is that every government is controlled by one class, and he thinks that class uses its power to suppress the other. So that's what I think he thinks we live under the dictatorship of the bourgeois, and they're oppressing the workers, and we want to live under the dictatorship of the proletariat so that they can oppress the bourgeois. And that's just really bad terminology. So literally back in 1899, a guy named Bernstein pointed out that this is like really people don't like the term dictatorship. So like simple examples are like just calling it worker democracy, for example. Even if you wanted to say like a relatively far left term, just tie it to stuff that people like democracy. Like workplace democracy is a wonderful example of this. You don't need to say that it's like workplace dictatorship for the proletariat. You just tie it to democracy and you say it's about workers, that kind of stuff. So definitely, like I think that messaging is actually like the actual policies you believe and the messages you put out shouldn't necessarily be like too far apart. I think there's some degree of honesty you need to have, but also I do think that like in general you can put much better messaging than a lot of lefties seem to do with like all cops are bastards and defund the police and dictatorship of the bourgeois. So
Yeah, even for issues like that, a lot of people who are more left-minded tend to live in like bigger cities. So something like defund the police makes complete sense. And these people are often also very educated about the different funding allocations and where that money actually goes and where money is taken from in education and public housing. They
mhm.
know all that stuff. But when it comes to where I'm from, rural Pennsylvania, where I mean, Police departments are underfunded here. So if someone hears defunded, defund the police, not only do they think, oh no, I'm a white person who's under attack, because we all know that's the white identity stuff from Nixon
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
Reagan and all that. They're also thinking like, what the hell? Our police department is barely surviving. So like this is a message that is so self-defeating in an area, like
Well,
any rural area. And these are the areas, this is the thing though, like when we're talking about workplace democracy and the working class, I think being able to formulate that message and talk to rural people, isn't that so important?
have you ever heard the term like triangulation? It's often used back in the Clinton era. It was often used as like a critique of Clinton, Bill, and Hillary.
Oh, you could explain it, please.
Sure. So the basic idea is that they were supposed to do whatever it was most popular. There was like a meme that Bill Clinton would like focus test which places he would go. Not meme. It was like a political thing back in the '90s that Clinton would focus group test like which place he was going to go to vacations. He'd focus test various words for stuff. And I guess my problem is I feel like a lot of the things that we talk about, like defund the police, are the kinds of things that should be workshopped. There should be like ideally where they're like the big brain of the left. They should sit down in a room with like 20 people who are swing voters, ideally, and try and find a way to express the leftist vote, the leftist concept, in such a way that they'd still vote for it. I did want to mention on defund the police is actually police are actually also interestingly underfunded in cities. There's this unique paradox that people in the inner city are simultaneously over policed and under policed. So one of the things that's very interesting, for example, is that the murder clearance rate in inner cities is around 60%. And a lot of that has to do with like distrust in the police system. It has to do with people not reporting leads and so on. But this is like for a whole bevy of crimes that like police basically aren't funded enough to provide basic services to like their communities. So it's not just a rural thing. It's just that specifically in the cities, there's a lot more police abuse. So like the basic idea is that I liked the term like if you are going to say defund the police, I like the phrase divest and invest, which has the problem of saying that people don't know what divest means and they don't know what you're investing in. But at least it's not as bad as defund the police, which makes people think of like Mad Max or something.
Yeah, you don't want to attack people who are already on the defense. And a lot of these working class people aren't going to be academically inclined to think of things in that way. And I get into discussions about, I know this gets me a lot of weird looks, but even a term like white privilege. It's a term
Mm-hmm.
that, like, I recognize I have privilege, you have privilege. We understand the concepts of, like, intersectionality. But if you go to a white guy and you talk about the racist systems that are, our country is founded upon, that white guy, he literally didn't have a hand in building that
Mm-hmm.
system. I don't see any value in directing hate towards individual police officers, towards individual white people, even towards billionaires. I mean, I also hate billionaires, but just hating them,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like distracts from the system. So if we're saying all cops are bastards, then we're not thinking about the system. We should always be separating from the individuals, attack them where they are. Like, okay, this is how the system is also negatively affecting you. But a lot of people on the left do what I call it like cheerleader politics, where it's like they turn on their stream every single day. They literally just have five different slogans they repeat. Like I see like
Have you,
yeah.
sorry to interject, have you had a chance to do you follow David Shore on Twitter and or have you had a chance to read Politics is for Power?
I've heard people talk about politics as for power and like how much power is actually out there to grab and everything. I'll
Oh,
continue.
sure. So I was just going to mention the big thesis of the book is precisely what you're talking about. They call cheerleader politics as political hobbyism. They basically say that it's something that people do for fun. Like you get on stream and you talk politics, you get mad at people, but you don't actually do anything to like obtain power. And so like this is true of the vast majority of people in like online spaces. The vast majority of online people on Twitter are just following news so they can get mad at the things Republicans do and cheerlead the stuff that Democrats do. And so they tie this back to like kind of a hobbyist sort of mentality that you're just debating for the sake of debating. You're like engaging in politics as a source of entertainment, not as a source of like power seeking. So that's I like the term political cheerleading though, because it has a somewhat more demeaning term to it. So.
Well, like people that I really respect and love, like Kyle Kalinske, for example, even he does it. You know, you take an issue that has a problem, and you see, oh,
Mhm.
I can name a ton of people. If you saw any one of my videos, like if you even scroll down, you would see Jimmy Dore, you would see Nico
Mhm.
House, you would see Kim Iverson. These people who put populism over like pragmatism. They literally just see an issue, and they're like, "This is why we need Medicare for all. This is why we need a Green New Deal." And part of where this stems from, I think this is one of the issues is a lot of people on the left see these polls for like Medicare for all, and they
Mhm.
say, oh, 70% of the country agrees with us. We're done. I mean, all we got to do is elect somebody. The establishment is the only thing stopping us. And I
Mhm.
actually exchanged DMs with a guy named Michael from Pennsylvania
Oh
about
my
this.
god.
So I'm sure you saw the exit polls from the election from Fox News. It said like how many people would approve of a government-run healthcare plan. There's a big issue with that, and I know the video you linked me where you criticized Mike from PA. You obviously pay a lot of attention to statistical understanding. When you
Mhm.
say, do you want a government-run healthcare plan? That's a public option. Some people think the ACA is a government-run plan. Some people think Medicare is a government-run plan,
Mhm.
and some people think Medicare for all is a government-run plan. And we really need, I think, to pay attention to which parts of our certain plans are really, what's hindering the success of certain things from being sold. So I actually DM'd Mike. I said,
Mhm.
he was talking about Destiny. And I said, you've got to realize that 80% of this country is to the right of Destiny. Get out of your Twitter bubble, friend. And he said, not,
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
according to every poll on the issues, dumbass. He's so like, I don't know why he has to be an asshole. Like, I think it's just like, I don't know if it's a strategy, but like,
Well,
usually when people do that, yeah, you
no,
go.
no, 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 no. Finish your story. Finish your story.
Usually when people come out and they just yell, I assume they're making up for a lack of logic and a lack of preparation for the conversation. You know what I mean? If they yell over like actually just like talk and defuse the situation.
Well,
But
that's so. I mentioned David Shore because his theory behind it is it's I know we have like the term virtue signaling. People don't like that too much, but to some degree, there's virtue signaling. People want to demonstrate that, I think I like the term like purity testing. This idea that you need to be the most pure leftist, and so pure leftism means no compromise. It means being angry at your opponents. It means not fist bumping fascists, which is what people are saying Kamala did by like touching Lindsey Graham or something. Um, and so like basically it's this theory that like the ideal leftist is the one who is like the most extreme then the least compromising, and there's basically the argument that politics is for power raises is that like this sort of thing prevents you from actually obtaining power because it limits you to the people that will actually be interested in working with you. If you never compromise, it will be very very hard to change people's minds. It'll be very very hard to do anything other than get out the base, as it were. So I'm sorry, I think you still had a little more like from PA. That's just the politics is for power thesis.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you 100%. This is the big issue I keep coming across, and if I try to be pragmatic, people tell me, "Oh, you're just being the Majority Report or David Pakman or something, or you're trying to be a MSNBC liberal." But like, no, I'm trying to evaluate these policies. Like the CARES Act, for example. That bill came out
Mm-hmm.
as it did for very clear reasons. If you study anything about policy, or if you even like, you look at the policy negotiating process. Like Jimmy Dore was screaming like, "Oh, AOC and Ro Khanna signed on to the CARES Act," and I'm like, okay, well, either they were going to sign on to the current CARES Act as it was, or there wasn't going to be one. Like they can't just hold
Mm-hmm.
up something like that because either you hold up stimulus people need, and at the beginning of the COVID crisis, we were in a better position than we were in now, probably, and we have no stimulus coming now. But either you
Mm-hmm.
hold it up
Really worried.
or you just don't vote for it. And people don't understand the concept, like you just said, like Kamala and like Lindsey Graham bumping fists. If you are a politician and you're talking about, say, Obama, or you're talking about the CARES Act, these are two things, Obama and the CARES Act, which people find to be very popular. If you are a
Mm-hmm.
politician and you attack something that is very popular, it's like if you're playing like Pokemon and you have like a level like 10 electrode and you use self destruct. you are going to hurt the enemy a lot,
What
but
a gamer.
you're also destroying yourself in the process. Like when
Hmm.
Tulsi attacked Kamala, it did hurt Kamala a little bit, but then Tulsi's approval rating dipped, I think, 40%. So if you do
Hmm.
something like that, it hurts you politically. If you literally come out and your only, like you just said, political virtue signaling is, oh, Obama's a dirty war criminal who deserves to be in prison right now. Holy shit, Obama's the most popular person in the Democratic Party other than Jimmy Carter. You're throwing away all of your political influence, and I don't know if it's because these people make a lot of money doing it or what.
Well, that's actually so. One of the arguments in the book that they raise for why Trump actually was successful is that one of the things that they found using basically they don't have statistical data for this. They have a series of anecdotes, but it I don't know. It lines up with my understanding of the world, so I will choose to adopt it as real. Basically, there are a series of examples where someone did something that insulted someone else. So, do you remember the guy in 2009 who, at Obama's like State of the Union address, cried out like "liar" or something
I
to
saw that
Obama?
clip. Yeah, I did see that clip. Yeah.
That guy got like $2 million or $3 million in donations the next day. If you remember when Kamala Harris said that Biden was like anti was the segregationist or something, right? She had this like big night. She got like $3 million out of that the next day. But these things were utterly temporary, and so their argument for why Trump was a little different is that he just never ever stops. He's constantly the person who is just making fun of other people. So in short, their theory is that like being aggressive and childish and like constantly insulting can get you lots and lots of funds, but it also promotes like the worst politicians possible. I guess that's part of the point of it. It lends itself towards like purity testing. It lends itself towards idiots who don't actually have any substance to provide. They're just aggressive and they just hate on other people a lot.
Yeah, and I
So
think there's a clear Democrat. Like people tell me all the time, Bernie Sanders failed because he should have been like the Donald Trump of the Democratic Party, and
mhm.
you would think that if you don't take into consideration the demographics of both party. The Republican Party is a lot of white rural people, people in the suburbs, people who will take a white nationalist fighting, take that persona and latch onto it. They will love that. But if a Bernie Sanders comes in and does that to the Democratic Party, liberals, as we say online, they still own the Democratic Party. The typical soccer parent voter owns the Democratic Party. And you could say they own
Yeah.
politics in general because that's really the group that Biden swung. It's the suburbanites. I called it just like the Southern strategy for
Hmm.
Nixon that kind of flipped the parties. Biden had the suburban strategy. So that
Oh my
kind of
god.
flipped, moderate Republicans to be what Democrat, to be under the same umbrella as Democrats. And now the Democrats are trying to be like a catch-all party,
Hmm.
latching off of that. So there's actually one thing I wanted to bring up though. I'm a little bit earlier about polling, but you could reply to that if you want to.
No, I mean, that's one of the things again that David Shore argues, and that oh, what's his face? There's a study by one of the people who works for 538. What they both of them pointed to is that Democrats didn't win 2016 just due to turnout increases. In fact, in some areas, turnout for blacks was down. Turnout for Hispanics might have been the same, but it was actually more Republican than usual. The main thing that shifted states towards Democrats was that suburban shift. So I guess in short, the argument that like the politics is for power book argues is that while purity testing is like nice and fun, perhaps like if we are to actually pursue policy goals, the things that actually change people's minds are like tend to be the sort of compromise solutions, tend to be the things that are in the middle of the road, even if the actual policy you promote or care about, like behind the scenes or whatever, is substantially more extreme. So
Okay. Yeah, I know what you're saying. So, I wanted to get your take on healthcare policy and how to sell, like things like Medicare for all. So, when we go through public opinion polling, the most favorable ways to label universal healthcare would be a
mhm.
national health plan, a government-run plan, Medicare for all, or like just universal health coverage. Or you ask, should everybody have healthcare? If you
Mhm.
ask people that, the respondents will be 70% in favor of that plan. But
Mhm.
if you say things like socialized medicine or single payer healthcare, then that approval rating dips down tremendously. If you tell people that Medicare for all includes eliminating private insurance, although we know that's a good thing, that dips
Mhm.
its approval rating below 50%. If you tell them even more, going even further, that there will be one single government plan everyone needs to be on, the unemployment, or not the unemployment, the favorability rating dips even more. And there are unemployment issues with that as well. People are worried about, like, okay, where are healthcare workers going to go if they're, like, the one person, I was at this one, Bernie rally in New Hampshire. I drove 10 hours to see him before the COVID crisis and before the
Hmm.
primaries. This guy stood up and said, I'm going to lose my job if we implement Medicare for all. And Bernie said, what do you do? And the guy essentially said, my job is to deny people health care, which is
Hmm.
like saying, like, oh, we can't stop fires because then we can't hire any more firefighters, sort of. You know what I mean? We're eliminating a
Hmm. Hmm.
problem, so we don't need them anymore. That's a good thing, but it's perceived as a negative. And this is where I'm getting with all the Mike from PA stuff, and also Kyle Kalinske, also Crystal Ball, Jimmy Dore. If you look at these polls and you just say, okay, 70% of the country agrees with us already, I feel like that does a disservice to our strategy of how we're going to sell this. And this goes one layer even further that nobody seems to consider. This is one really important thing. So, okay, two important things. So,
Uh-oh.
a majority of Medicare for All supporters actually think it does not eliminate private insurance. So if you're asking them if they like Medicare for All, they usually assume it literally means taking Medicare as is and expanding that to the entire country, which would be more like Australia, more like I think Sweden might have a similar model. And this is the kicker that happened in this Democratic primary. So if you ask somebody, okay, do you like hot dogs and do you like cheeseburgers? They might say yes to
Hmm.
both. If 70% of people both like hamburgers and cheeseburgers, or cheeseburgers and hot dogs,
Hmm.
they both like those hot dogs and cheeseburgers, but they might choose one over the other. So in this Democratic primary, if you asked a voter, although they liked M4A and the ACA, if you said, would you rather a candidate to fight for a Medicare for all or to fight for the ACA,
Hmm.
55% of Democratic voters said, I would rather a candidate to build on the ACA. So, like, when we talk about policy models, not only do you need to sell a policy initially to fix a problem, but there are going to be competing policies. And I think a lot of progressives don't really acknowledge that, or they aren't aware that many Democrats weren't for Medicare for all, even with the best phrasing. So, yeah.
That is one of the things. One of the things that I find very frustrating is a lot of times people will cite polls that are like from Data for Progress, for example, which tends to put things in really, really positive lights. They'll be like, it'll be something like, would you prefer a government funded program which would provide pharmaceuticals free for everyone, funded using taxes on the rich or something? Like the best possible framing. And they'll get like 70% of people on like the side of the poll, but they will tend not to read into the poll and like look at the comparative numbers. I totally agree with that. Like I'm pretty sure the poll you're citing might be from Kaiser Permanente, or not Kaiser Permanente, the Kaiser Family Foundation,
Yeah, yeah,
which
probably.
I just remember it like looks at it looks at support for Medicare for all, it looks at Medicare for all if you're going to eliminate private insurance, it looks at all these like various messaging things. And so I totally do agree that people don't look into the nuances so much. And I do think one of the things that's odd is I think so in the debate, not the debate, in the very short conversation I had with Mike before he banned me from his Twitch chat, right? Um, um, uh, basically, I argued that this study called Gillenson Page 2014 is wrong, and that people do have a democratic impact on like how society functions. I think one of the reasons that a lot of people on the left tend to believe that democracy doesn't work is they see these polls where it's like, oh, 70%, 80% of people in America, they want like government-run pharmaceuticals, they want government-run healthcare. How are we not getting these policies? Clearly, it's because the democracy isn't working. And I think the answer is that people's actual policy preferences tend to actually be much more centrist. That America's policy preferences genuinely are closer to the center than people think. So that has been very frustrating to me.
Yeah, and that's where my point comes from, that destiny probably is to the left of 80% of America. Although, of course, some of the stuff he says on certain issues seems a little bit out there when it comes to the property defense stuff. Although I'm more to the right than you would probably be, I'm guessing on that stuff. I'm just gonna assume since you're a socialist when it comes to all that stuff.
How would you describe yourself, actually? Brief interjection.
Okay, so if I talk to anybody really now, like I would typically say progressive, but I also like
Hmm.
to say if I have the time, let's go issue by issue, because I don't my big thing is, since I'm going to be running, I say to people, national politics is a big reality TV show. That's all bullshit. I want to bring it back to the reality, our reality and your reality. And we're going to talk about these policies and how these policies are going to affect your life. No capitalism, no socialism. And also, like,
Hmm. Hmm.
I just don't like telling people a label and then they could assume, like, based off that I'm agreeing with everybody else who uses that label. Like Jim Clyburn is calling himself a progressive now, and also, you know, someone who's very far
Hmm.
left might call themselves a progressive who's more left than myself. So I just like having control as much as I can of how people perceive my politics.
No, I really like that because one of the things that we have seen, right, is that a lot of times progressive direct ballot initiatives have actually outperformed Democratic candidates, which I thought was very interesting. Like, I think Florida passed the $15 minimum wage initiative with like 60% of the vote, but Trump got like 53% of the vote in that state. So I do think that there is utility there in trying to focus on the issues. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, that's a thing too. Like talking about different states, and they're polling for per issue. Just saying like, oh, Florida voted for a $15 minimum wage. Biden should have won there. That's not how politics operates, and that's assuming people vote off of policy. When in reality, most of our elections are decided by low information voters, and low information isn't a criticism, or it is a criticism, but it's not an insult.
Yeah, it's
I'm
not
sure
like a
you're
moral
familiar with that.
condemnation. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
but
it's just a sociological description that they
yeah.
don't read as much. Yeah.
Why do you think? I guess I guess I'm gonna start calling myself like what does Vosh call himself and like Xander Hall and stuff. The dirtbag
If you
left,
want
is it?
market
No, no, not
dirtbag left.
yeah, no dirtbag left. I think I would call what I'm trying to do like pragmatic progressivism, if that makes
Mm,
sense. And people often mistake that for liberalism, but I guess it does make sense when it comes to like if you look at like a certain axis, like you might see liberal and conservative, like in America, as left and right. When it comes to like liberal and illiberal, so like liberal and populist, I guess I am more towards the liberal side, than I would be towards the populist side. Um, if that makes sense.
mhm.
What is okay? What is the difference between okay? I hear the terms revolutionary and reformist. Would I just be a
Sure.
reformist, like from what I'm saying, or
Sure. So revolutionaries, generally, they're ones who want like a violent revolution. They want to like organize the masses, hand out AKs, and like start a civil war and or like do a coup and like take control of government. Very few people are revolutionaries in modern politics. As much as they, whenever you talk to a revolutionary, they'll tell you that like the true socialists, the true lefties or whatever, they're all revolutionaries. But in reality, the vast majority of people have no interest in participating in a revolution, which is why there hasn't been a successful socialist revolution in a liberal democracy ever, like literally, period. Um, uh, so the reform just means that it generally means something. Either if you're an electoralist, it means that you only think you only want to like get votes, you only want to participate in the electoral process. More broadly, I argue for a reformism, which includes stuff like mass advocacy groups like the ACLU and unions, which tend to provide on the ground more like grassroots support. So generally, I would describe reformism as like a combination of electoralism, trying to get people in your party elected, entryism, entering existing institutions of power, trying to change them, like what's called dual power, basically trying to create institutions of power outside of electoral institutions that can still organize people and push for their rights, a bit like unions. And what was the fourth one? I want to say it was something like that was it. I believe there's this concept called, and this sounds really sinister, of agenda seeding. I really liked it in this paper about. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. It's this paper about the 1960s. Yeah, right here. 1968 civil rights riots. So after Martin Luther King was shot, like assassinated, there were a series of riots in American cities and a series of nonviolent protests. And one of the things that the authors of this study found is that in places where there were nonviolent protests, where you organize people nonviolently, there was a big shift to the Democratic Party of like 2 to 3 percentage points. In areas where there was a riot, a violent protest, there was a big shift to the Republican Party of like 2 to 3 to possibly 6%. And that probably lost Democrats the election. So it's like a big impact, I guess, is my point. So in short, I guess my argument is that reform means you don't kill people, at least you try not to.
okay, and okay, so when it comes to changing things for policy, perception, and public opinion, there are certain strategies different politicians tend to take. So what Bernie Sanders essentially did with his entire presidential run, the first time and the second time, is he did choose the most radical policies possible. Like Medicare for all, it is the most left, the most expansive healthcare plan in history. It really is, with eye care, with dental included in it, covering
Mhm.
100% free at the point of service. It really is. And also with things like the Green New Deal. A lot of this is so they got this whole generation of people coming up, and AOC did win the generational battle, and Bernie Sanders and the squad, they all won the generational battle. We have a generation of people coming up who are not going to take anything but the Green New Deal, who are not going to take anything but Medicare for all. I think that's a good way to move public opinion, to move the Overton window. But the issue is when all these people find themselves to be politically, I guess, inviolable because they don't know how to focus all of that in the right areas. And this is something that I think I actually did email Destiny a while back about coming on stream, and he did say I could. I stopped. I didn't message him because of the election and everything. We were going to talk about those strategies. So, like, is it worth it for Bernie to go completely left and shift public opinion if that isn't the most pragmatic route to be president? Because if you really wanted to talk about like Medicare for all that could appeal to everybody, you would do more of a, just Medicare that's for everybody. Instead of a 1-tier system, it creates a 2-tier. It becomes like Australia,
So one of the things I wanted to mention a little bit, I think that often in these conversations about messaging, it's often I think that people often talk in these like binary poles, where the one pole is we need to have the centrist messaging. We need to be as centrist as possible to swing over like the swing voters. We need to change people's minds by having the least inoffensive things possible. And the other side is like, well, we won't get systemic change if we keep electing centrists. We won't be able to like see a better world if we keep electing centrists. And as with all things, one of the big themes that I like to point to is that almost everything's a gradient. I basically note on the one hand that like appealing to more centrist policies, and this is one of the things that David Shore, if you follow him, he's like a whole bunch of data points on this. More centrist candidates tended to do better in like the 2018 elections, in the 2020 elections. There is a genuine electoral benefit of running to the center in that more people are swung to your side. However, on the other hand, there is a long-term benefit of changing people's opinion. And so one of the things that I mentioned in that I did a previous conversation with Destiny and Bastiat about the Supreme Court. I don't know if you happened to catch that. Of course, a true Destiny fan. And one of the things that I noted is that when Democratic leadership changed their like official statement on impeachment, it changed the Democrats. I'm sorry, it changed the popular opinion on impeachment by like 16 percentage points or something. And there was something similar for, I want to say Republicans had like an even larger shift on a variety of policy issues after Trump changed what he talked about. So I guess my argument is that the synthesis of these two things, the middle ground of like wanting to achieve political process and wanting to run to the center for electoral gains, is probably what you want to do is when you're further from elections, when you want to change people's minds, you want to be talking about the more extreme policies. And then nearer elections, you probably actually do want to do the whole pivot towards the center. Or put another way, if you are going to run policies that are outside of the norm, you want to run like slightly to the left to try and pull people to the left, because it genuinely does seem like the party can change people's minds. But you only want to run as far left as will get you enough seats to actually get like you to have power, because power is the most important ultimate goal at the end if you want to see your goals realized. That's overarching theory.
Yeah, that's the conversation between like divest and invest and defund the police. Like, you could choose those radical statements, but you don't need to do it so it's like, it's gonna make you incompatible with actual progress and actually grabbing power, because people are too scared to come to those policies. Like certain things that are radical sell themselves. Medicare for all, Green New Deal, those are great wording. But when it comes to things
those are wonderful, right?
Yeah, but when it comes to like defund the police, when it comes to even a term like democratic socialism versus progressive, certain things sell easier, and we shouldn't be making it harder on ourselves where we don't need to be. But I know there are arguments, like you just said, to be more radical in certain situations, and I agree. But in being radical for certain policies, can't you also do that in a very smart and strategic way? And I'm sure we have enough progressive focus groups at this point to learn like which terminology works.
So the argument that I would raise is basically that the context where you want to be on the left is like further from elections, ideally. So like the day after the election, after the results are all in, okay? Or maybe after, what's it? Oh, actually, this is a reminder to stream, okay? 6th January. Wait, is that right? Georgia election date. I'm pretty sure it's 6th January. Election day is 5 January. Okay, I almost told people to vote on the wrong day. 5 January in Georgia is the last day to vote in the runoff elections, and all of you should participate in phone banking or text banking if you are an asocial fuck like me. And if you just Google text banking Georgia, you'll get a volunteer for Democrats page. There's lots and lots of organizations you can work with to help get Democrats elected so that we can actually see a possibility of like achieving some of these green policies. So after January 5th would be like the precise moment when Bernie Sanders comes out and like starts talking about the Medicare for all sort of thing again. The idea to me would be like temporally, when it's important, would be further from elections. And then near elections, what you want to do again is in like safe Democratic districts, you might have people like AOC who might be trying to bring things to the left, but they'd want to doing it in such a way that like the seat that there's enough safety in their seats that they'd still maintain a Democratic majority. So I know I've said that twice now, but that's the basic theory.
Yeah, and it still does matter to have a Democratic majority for many reasons, for many different policies. And when we look at the political reality of different areas, like I bet, do you hate Joe Manchin too? Like, can you like not stand him either?
He's a better than a Republican, but he's not.
That's the thing though. He's from West Virginia, but a lot of progressives don't understand that. If Joe Manchin isn't Joe Manchin, we don't get a progressive or not a we don't get a Democratic seat from West Virginia in the Senate. You know what I mean? So,
That was what so recently Current Affairs put out a thing. So John Ossoff, the one of the two candidates in the Georgia runoff race, I want to say that he's running against Loeffler, but I can't actually remember. John Ossoff, no, that's wrong. John Ossoff is running against Perdue. And so Perdue, for reference, opposes gay marriage. He doesn't think that climate change is real. He tried to end immigration to the United States. There's like every policy that you can think of. He is in the wrong on this one. And then John Ossoff is only merely in favor of a public option, which, to be clear, is further left than Democrats have been virtually ever on healthcare since, I don't know, at least since the 60s or something. And so Current Affairs was like, oh, he doesn't support Medicare for all. I guess he doesn't support healthcare for everyone. I can go to get the actual tweet. But it was just very frustrating to me because the comparison between an annoying Democrat is like he'll only support, 2 steps to the left, and an annoying Republican is he'll only support 10 steps to the right. Like, god damn.
yeah, so the far right isn't okay, the regular right isn't okay, the moderates aren't okay, the regular Democrats aren't okay, the AOC progressives aren't okay. Well, I guess everybody in the political process is against us. How are we going to wage any political power if AOC isn't to the left enough for us? If she's being a liberal to you, if AOC is somehow being too far right for you, then how the hell do you think your theory of change is going to work? And what is your theory of change? But also, the same people that say this shit, they often don't give you any type of actual fix. Like everybody, the easiest thing to do is to identify problems. I mean, I can't say it's too easy because people are bad at it. But anybody could sit on their couch and be like,
it's
this
much
sucks.
easier to find a problem than it is to find a solution. Definitely I'll agree with that.
Yeah, you could just be like, oh, this sucks. The establishment's controlling everything. But like you said, like there's different theories to change. There's elite theory, there's group theory, and group theory does hold true in many scenarios. You know what I mean?
Actually, so on that note, you'd mentioned before the stream, I think you'd mentioned the multiple streams theory. Did you want to describe any theories of like political change and like political advocacy, possibly?
One moment. I could bring this document up really quick. So there's basically like elite theory is basically what everybody on the left believes to be true. That's essentially like, okay, there's an elite group in society and they orchestrate everything. They are the only reason anything ever changes. So if Medicare for all passes someday, I guess it'll be elite theory. But like you said, it's disproven by things like, okay, Biden is considering a $2 trillion climate plan, and Chuck Schumer is advocating to eliminate college debt. Just off that alone, you should know.
That was so crazy to me that Chuck Schumer of all was like, we need to cancel college debt, like $50,000. I was like, fucking insane.
But that alone should disprove to like Mike from PA that, policy is affected a little bit.
So I guess that what they'll say is that these things aren't actual policy yet. And so one of the things that's very frustrating is the U.S. political system at both the federal and the state level in 49 of the 50 states has a really strong status quo bias. So the Senate and the House, just having two houses, enormously slows legislation. There's some study that it literally like doubles the amount of time that legislation spends going through the houses. It doubles the amount of expenses involved in legislation, on and on and on. It is just physically harder to like lobby for progressive change or conservative change in a bicameral legislature. The only state that doesn't have this is Nebraska, I'm pretty sure, which had like a big progressive / socialist movement in the 20s or something, which is why they don't. And that's unicameral, I'm pretty sure. But I guess the point is like there's this big status quo bias. And so even though Chuck Schumer and like a majority of Americans and the Democrats are all in favor of this, because the Senate has this big conservative bias and a big status quo bias, things just don't change.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the reasons our democracy is actually more stable, because it can't change that quick. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons, like Donald Trump, everyone's making fun of the coup attempt or whatever. But, I mean, one of the reasons stuff like that is hard to happen is because our government is incrementalist. If it was more free changing, free moving, then we might be more at threat of a collapse of some sort. You could say that there's positives and negatives to certain things about that. But I sent you like an outline that I wrote up really quick about the multiple streams theory. It's so like simple, but I think it's still a good way to think about how this stuff is usually it usually comes about with policy making.
Neat.
Yeah, it's essentially basically like, okay, of course there's like we could use so let's use the opioid epidemic. So it was always affecting the inner cities, of course, but when it finally got to white people, there was enough public attention, so that would be the problem stream. So once a problem gets enough public attention to be known as a problem and to be like politically forceful, then the problem stream opens up. So these three streams, I should probably begin with this. So we talk about policy windows and public policy. So basically, when a policy window opens, that's your chance to actually create policy change. This is created by John Kingdon. This is often used as a source to as a framework to look at this. So there's the problem stream, there's the policy stream, and there's the politics stream. So the opioid epidemic and the problem stream, like I said, once it got to white people, it became a big enough problem for people to give a shit about. So that opens up the problem stream. Then we get to the policy stream, which is when a bunch of different policy solutions compete to solve a problem. The politics stream is what policymakers actually do, and that's like the motive and opportunity to actually turn this problem and the policy into action. Now, within all of these streams, we have policy entrepreneurs acting at each stage. I mean, a good example would be that's really clear is universal basic income, because I guess Andrew Yang is an entrepreneur and he turned into a policy entrepreneur. So a problem stream opened up with automation. Andrew Yang came in with the universal basic income, and this would be competing with like a jobs guarantee from Bernie Sanders. And then in the politics stream, do you like the jobs guarantee?
Oh no, if we have to have something like that, I'm a big fan of UBI, but I'm sorry.
Oh, you're UBI.
Keep going on keep going.
Yeah, so so the universal basic income, a policy window opened up due to automation. Andrew Yang used that policy window to make UBI a well-known solution. So the entire country, or a lot of the country that didn't know before, now knew about UBI, or in more plain terms, a basic income. In more plain terms, direct money from the government to people. So that policy window Andrew Yang used to get that policy popularity. Now, when COVID came around, that's another problem that we needed policy solutions for, and a politics stream also opened as well. So that's another policy window that opened. So since Andrew Yang used the last policy window to push forward UBI, you can say that's why the $1,200 checks went straight to Americans with the COVID-19 crisis.
Sure, it's possible. I guess that one's actually a really complicated thing, but sir, I definitely think. Well, this is so one of the things I wanted to mention a little bit on this notion of like policy entrepreneurs and the opening of the policy window is we have seen, I would argue, from the progressive side of things, an enormous benefit of like Bernie Sanders, for example, participating in the political system, having this enormous platform on which to speak about these things, and it seems like moving people to the left. Because it seems like a lot of these policies have become more mainstream than they were 4 years ago. Like Joe Biden is in favor of he more or less wants to appeal Taft-Hartley. He wants to do the green. He doesn't want to do the Green New Deal. He'll make a big fuss if he say he wants to do the Green New Deal, but he wants to do something that's like an enormous Green's New Works project, which will enormously modernize the country. He wants a $15 minimum wage. All of these things were not normal before like the 2016 sort of election stream. And so I guess when I had read about this method of policy change, it mentioned that policy entrepreneurs are often like only interested in one idea, which fits more like Andrew Yang, whose big thing was pushing for UBI. But I think that when you have politicians with sufficiently large like kind of viewer bases, like people listening to them, like Bernie Sanders, or possibly AOC, it might be possible they can promote multiple policies and shift people's opinion. So again, that's like, to me, that's the long view. It's that the goal should be like obtain power, use big platforms, change people's views, and then try and convert that back into votes, because ultimately that's what really matters.
And the policy entrepreneur matters a lot too. So I saw people saying like, if Joe Biden simply ran on Medicare for all right now, he would easily blow out Donald Trump in 40 states. I'm like, holy shit, that's the dumbest shit ever. Not only because Medicare for all isn't really that popular when it comes to swing voters, but also because if you have a shitty policy entrepreneur, they can't be selling a unpopular policy. Medicare for all is a very difficult policy to sell. You need really skilled policy entrepreneurs to do that. You need popular policy entrepreneurs to do that. So people are laughing at AOC for going on Vanity Fair, for going on all these magazines, for doing all these makeup tutorials. AOC getting popularity makes her worth as a policy entrepreneur so much more. This is why celebrities can push policies forward, because they're popular.
Do you remember, it was obviously such a flop, but it also worked. Do you remember the Bloomberg campaign when they would literally pay people like $500 to like have influencers, like Instagram fucking influencers? Like, wow, this was so great, such a great makeup tutorial. Have you guys considered voting for Bloomberg in the primary or something? And it fucking worked. He went up to like 10% in the polls or something. Now, obviously, that was extremely temporary and extremely expensive. But I guess the broader point is like, yes, having control of like public access matters. That's why advertising works to some degree, though political advertising a little bit less so.
Yeah, definitely. And we could go like issue by issue with different policy entrepreneurs and also policy windows when they open. A lot of different entrepreneurs are going to be crowding into those spaces. So in 2016, Bernie Sanders obviously capitalized on Hillary Clinton being a ball of crap to push
Basically.
forward things like Medicare for all. And also, many people know the healthcare system in America is broken. The ACA didn't go perfect. But yeah, people were looking for more options. Give everybody healthcare like every other country in the world. Easy thing to sell. In 2020, when that policy window opened again due to the election, after 4 years of Trump, we saw more policy entrepreneurs freaking crash into that area. So that's why we saw Medicare for All who want it. That was a direct competitor, of course, to Medicare for
Mhm.
All. So Pete Buttigieg, as a policy entrepreneur, came into the scene to directly attack Bernie Sanders' policy. And this is where I
Mhm.
think a lot of people miss a lot of where like voters are going to go. These competing policy entrepreneurs are constantly trying to win out every single election. And at the
Mhm.
point, where Joe Biden beats Bernie Sanders already, it might do more harm to Bernie's advocacy of Medicare for all if he says to Joe Biden, I'm not going to support you. So, like, if that makes sense. So, like, if, the nominee of the Democratic Party is going to be somewhat popular in the Democratic Party. If you are Bernie Sanders,
Mhm.
like I saw people saying, like, Bernie's being too nice to Joe Biden. Bernie should simply tear it all down back in March when
Mhm.
COVID was
Mhm.
about to happen. That one debate they had where they like touched elbows and all that. They were like, Bernie should burn it down right now. Use his massive people's movement. And I'm like, okay, you have 2% of the country. That's not a massive people's movement yet. But the Democratic
Mhm.
Party, when it comes to Democratic voters, we need them to vote for Medicare for all someday. So we need to maintain popularity in their eyes. So that's why it's important. Like even if you are a policy entrepreneur, don't do that
I know.
100%. Like have some nuance with it.
Well, that's so something that often comes up to me when I talk to people who are at least okay with some level of reform. There are some leftists that I talk to who are like totally not okay with it. They want to be like a Maoist group that's going to go form like a commune in Idaho and I don't know, bomb buildings or something. They're far out there. But then when you talk to people who are closer to reform but still pretty close to revolution, um, often what they'll say is, "Hey, I'm willing to support like work in the parliamentary system. I'm willing to work in the electoral system, but only if I have a party that's specifically aimed at workers, because they're not willing to kind of work in this sort of big tent compromise oriented party, which is, to be clear, I think is key to obtaining power. One of the things that I thought is really interesting in the Politics is Power book is he has, I want to say, 2 to 3 chapters discussing something that I have thought is incredibly interesting, which is the importance of partisan affiliation, which he equates directly to something like sports affiliation. So the analogy that they draw is when you ask like Patriots fans, what's is it like Patriots and I don't know, like Yankees and Red Sox or whatever, sports. Basically, their analogy is when you ask like Red Sox fans, would you be okay with your child marrying a Yankee fan? They're like 20% less likely to say it than other members of the population. And a very similar thing occurs for Republicans and Democrats. Democrats don't want their kids marrying Republicans and vice versa. But one of the things that he shows is that a lot of these things actually disappear when you like have them interact as people and you don't give them explicit partisan affiliations. So Democrats will rate Republicans as stupid, and Republicans will rate Democrats as stupid in polls about them in general. But when you have them actually do an evaluation of another person in person who you know to be a Democrat, they will rate them exactly the same. So in short, there's this argument that a lot of what we do in terms of partisan politics is literally just like rah rah my team, and so there's a huge utility, an enormous utility of just being in the Democratic Party, which is, this is what I call the idea of entryism. It's that entering into institutions that already have power gives you more power than having to build an institution all on your own, trying to have to build this like absurd brand loyalty all on your own. So
Yeah, like the graphs that say 70 million voters Democrat, 70 million voters Republican. There's 80 million voters who don't vote. Let's go get them. I'm like, okay, the most difficult thing in American history is getting
is
non-voters.
to get
Okay,
them to vote.
good luck.
Yeah, because
Good
that's
luck.
that's what political candidates have been doing for 60 years, and they haven't done it yet. So maybe you're the one, but it's just very unlikely.
Yeah, maybe you're the one. I was gonna bring something else up. Yeah, let me think for a second. I honestly just totally had a brain fart of what I was gonna bring up next. Um, do you have any ideas?
Well, so one
While
of
I
the things that I
think.
was going to mention is just sorry, did you have your idea?
No, no, keep going. I'll think about it while you talk.
Sure. One of the things that I mentioned that I posted a little earlier was this tweet from David Shore, who again is consistently arguing for these things. So I do need to try and find people who are more critical of this perspective, where what he showed is that unpopular leaders do have a significant impact on or at least in the polls, they have a significant impact on how parties poll. So, for example, they showed that in New Zealand, I believe this first graph is, the support for Labour went from like 30% to like 45%, almost putting them at a majority after they nixed this one really unpopular leader. And the third graph they show is after Keir Starmer. I don't know if you know the whole like drama. Ew, that's a fucking disgusting mask. I'm sorry. Holy shit. After Corbyn, who was like a very, very unpopular leader, was nixed, and they put Keir Starmer in, who, to be clear, is also more moderate, and I think, like, therefore, I suppose I have less support for him or whatever. After they put him in, Labour has enormously climbed in the polls, whereas Johnson has enormously dipped in the polls. I think in this thread, they also present one more graph from New Zealand showing the exact same thing. It was this one. After the Liberals in this graph, that's what the L, and I think NP is the National Party, but I'm not sure. And then ALP might be the Australian Labour Party, I think, but I don't quote me on this. Basically, in short, they got rid of the unpopular leader and they shot up like 20, like what is that, 10 points? So in short, the point is just like, I think these are obvious examples of where messaging matters, where like popular leader figureheads matter. So just to put numbers on it, this can have real electoral impacts.
Yeah, so like Bernie Sanders, I think, is third in the Democratic Party. Barack Obama is number two, and Jimmy Carter is number one. And Jimmy Carter did vote for Bernie Sanders, but I don't think that was very publicized. But yeah, that stuff definitely does matter, just popularity in general. And I think people too often dip out.
I think that almost certainly Bernie Sanders would have beaten were it not Biden, who was like an extremely well-known and extremely popular candidate. That's all I was going to mention. Like were it Clinton too, you might have seen like a reversal of the votes.
Well, would you agree that Bernie Sanders had a better chance of appealing against Hillary again than he did with Trump being in office the past 4 years? Because I sort of hold that.
I wasn't trying to make like a specific Hillary point. It was more that Clinton was one of the least popular people in American politics, whereas Biden, I want to say, was in the top like 10% of people in politics or something along those lines. He was very beloved by the Democratic Party and reasonably beloved by the American people in general, as is Bernie Sanders. And so that they were kind of on even footing, whereas before it was Bernie Sanders, an extremely popular but unknown candidate, versus Hillary Clinton, a very known but also very hated candidate. I don't have any beliefs about the general because I think that COVID just provides too much of like a shock to really make any claims there.
Okay, I remember what I was going to talk about. Also, in 2022, those midterm elections I think are going to be much more important than the 2024 general elections then, because like you said, people really just think, oh, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. They get into the reality TV show mindset, the sport team mindset. They don't see actual policies, they don't see actual issues affecting them. In midterm elections, if we really do, as we claim to have as progressives, if we really have this organizing base, if we have this activist base, we need to claim hold in 2022, which midterm elections are usually very inactive for typical voters. We need to gain ground there. We need to connect straight to voters then. Because once we get to the presidential elections, it becomes the Super Bowl. We can't win during the Super Bowl, in my opinion. We need to win in the hardcore reality Americans are facing. So I think if progressives don't do well in 2022, I think that's not going to be a good sign for 2024. I don't think there's any chance 2024 takes hold, but of course we have so many fluctuations in reality in general. But the importance of 2022, I think, is being undervalued already, and I think we really need to heighten up the intensity 100%.
So, I totally agree. I very much agree. What was it? Oh, there was something you said that I wanted to respond to.
Yeah, I looked at the mask earlier and I just started forgetting things. It makes you really just think about like all the wrong in the world.
It's so gross. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Is this like a Halloween thing or do you just have it in
Yeah, I
general?
got it 4 years ago.
Oh
Yeah,
my God.
I had to crack it out.
I guess I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that I necessarily agree with like the general versus midterm sort of thing, because I think one of the things that we do know is that older voters tend to vote more in midterms, and so probably progressives have like the least chance in midterms to
Yeah,
like make gains.
definitely.
I do think so. One of the arguments, again, just appealing to this book again, but it's like a general truth, is that Politics is Power makes this argument that grassroots organizations can bring out the vote a lot more consistently than can just basically relying on people to vote. So one of the things that's really interesting is that Democrats have increasingly become the party of the high educated people. And yet, even though they're high educated, a lot of those high educated people who have more free time, have more money, have more ability to contribute to politics, they just don't. They just don't turn out to volunteer. one of their arguments is that a lot of these people are engaged in policy only from the cheerleading sort of things. They like we are all, and I'm sure that I have been in this place, as have like you, and I would think most people in my chat have been the political cheerleaders. We just want to fight for our side. We just want to feel good about our side winning and like hate on the other side. So the suggestion that the guy makes is that did you see the little kerfuffle that AOC got into about kind of these like trying to set up these grassroots long-term organizations instead of doing day before the vote sort of get out the vote campaigns.
Yeah, I did.
In short, and I thought it was interesting because Beto published something that said something very similar a few days later, is that these sort of long-term grassroots organizations genuinely can get out the vote and genuinely can convince people. There's this really poignant example that they point to in a very conservative Pennsylvania county where I think his name is Connor Lamb. He won by like 500 votes. And it was just like a few months after this organization had been signed up and was consistently getting around 500 people to the polls. So were it not for them, it would have been like a nearly 50-50 vote, I guess is the way of thinking about these things. There's like a genuine benefit to these on the ground sort of things instead of the traditional politics as like advertisement right before the election thing. Is that your cat?
Yeah, here he is.
He's cute.
Yeah.
He does kind of look like Trump though, so I don't know if I can support that.
Yeah,
right?
he's
He's an
of the
orange
hair. Yeah. Oh god, I'm gonna drop him. Yeah. So when it comes to policy and change, so you do accept like anything, right? You accept any progress at all? Is that your framework? And I know Vaj calls himself a market socialist. What are you? I did not ask you what you're. I think I saw like you said Marxist social. Like I forget.
Sure. So market socialism, I would also say that I'm a market socialist for more policy related reasons than pragmatism. But I do think that another big benefit of market socialism is just pragmatic. If you want to argue, so I think the three main goals of like a socialist society are one, you want worker ownership. You want like to move away from like individuals controlling businesses. You want to move towards like the workers within businesses controlling them. You want to move towards increasing democratic planning, which means that like the people themselves should decide what policies, what projects get priority, and not just what necessarily what is profitable. So examples would be like maybe subsidized housing and free healthcare, because those things are good for the people, and I would argue good for the economy and good for society, but not necessarily good for profit. And third would be what I call like an extreme reduction in inequality, basically to the point where nobody would be able to make a living from capital gains. De facto, this would mean the elimination of the bourgeois, but I don't usually say it as that. I just say that I want lower inequality. So one of the notes that's like really nice for market socialism is you don't have to be like, oh, to pull it back a bit, I know this is a long tangent. There's two kinds of socialism usually. If we're going to do this sort of binary thing, there's like planning, which is more on like the Marxist-Leninist side, and then there's market socialism. There's also like weird anarchist forms of organization of economics, but those don't work, so I don't think they're worth discussing. The basic idea is that market socialism is enormously easier to explain to like the average person than is planning socialism. Because when you say, oh, I'm a big believer in market socialism, and they're like, well, that won't work. The government can't plan everything, you'll just be like, well, that's okay. They won't be planning everything. It will still be markets. They'll just be cooperative markets. They'll say something like, this government program is run so inefficiently. That's okay. We'll just hand it over to the cooperative market or something along those lines. It's just like so much simpler to explain these sort of things. Just from a rhetorical perspective, I think it's useful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I just want all of us to keep on encouraging people not to LARP too much with their socialism in person. Like if I say to somebody like, okay, defund the police isn't the best thing to say right now, and they say, no, it is the right thing to say, just please, like, let's have a nice discussion about it. Let's break it down to I don't think breaking everything down to numbers is perfect, but I think it's good to pay attention to data and for everyone to have a statistical understanding of where certain things are going in our country. And I know, like, keep banging on Mike from PA, but that's just the example. I know he's from Pennsylvania, but like from his rhetoric, I couldn't tell, because the Pennsylvania I know, which is central Pennsylvania, is literally just West Virginia. You know what I mean? Like what central Pennsylvania is literally West Virginia if it was a state. The
analogy that I'd heard is Pennsylvania is Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in between.
Yeah, or like Pennsyltucky. Like, it's
Hmm.
so hard to get these ideas across to people. But I think it can be done. Like, for example, there's certain local issues. Like, for anybody listening, if you have an issue like this with charter schools, this is a big issue a lot of local school districts face because a lot of people want to go to online charter schools, which are usually all private. Now, the school district I was from for high school is spending around $2 million to send only a couple kids to online charter schools, which is way too much money. It would cost a lot less to hire a couple more teachers to facilitate like Zoom classes for the entire day. This is an issue you could tell to people. You don't have to say anything socialism. You don't have to say any of that. You could literally just say, why is our community paying corporations for things we can do better? That's literally all you have to say. You don't have to say worker, we don't have to destroy hierarchies. We don't need any of that. It's very.
I will say, even like some of the things I talked about, like worker democracy or like worker ownership, you don't even need to speak about those. I totally agree with that. Um, I was just going to mention. So I think before there was this like point in the conversation where it seemed like you were referring to like say democratic socialism and the use of labels as being a somewhat bad thing, and I think I have mixed thoughts on that. So the argument for me is it's the same argument as for short term and long term messaging in general. It's that when you attach a label to something, it gives like a way for people to organize it in their brain. There's a power in a word in like being able to say this is the policy I identify with, as opposed to just like vaguely thinking that you know that something's the right thing. And two, in the long run, maybe you can shift people to believe in that policy. You can like renormalize the word socialism, which I think Bernie Sanders probably has enormously done. Probably, I would argue at least, socialism has been more rehabbed in American political discourse than at any other point. Conversely, of course, the problem is always the short-term electoral gains. If you want to see those electoral gains, you can't call everything you need a socialist policy. You can't just say like we're establishing the dictatorship of the proletariat by abolishing private charter schools or something. It just doesn't work.
So my strategy basically is I agree with you. It is good to have labels to come around for like organizing purposes too. Like I am in this camp. This is what I'm going to be fighting for, stuff like that. My strategy is essentially to come in. I'm an independent. I'm going to be fighting
Mm-hmm.
for workers' rights. I'm going to be fighting so that these nasty corporations stop stealing from our people. Why is
Mm-hmm.
Walmart outside of our town? Why did they come in to kill all of our businesses? But now we're paying for their workers to go on food stamps and go on Medicaid. Why are we
Mm-hmm.
paying them to destroy our economy? Stuff like that. And then when it's all said and done, I get these ideas into people's heads when they hear somebody talk about some type of worker ownership or unionization or some type of universal health care. And I already talked to them about the individual policy. And they're watching Fox News, and this dumbass anchor says, "This is socialism. They want to take you over." Like, people are going to be like, in my experience at least, like, wait, this is the policy that I thought worked from this normal person. And then I say, oh, yeah, by the way, that's what socialists mean when they say that. I'm not a socialist or a capitalist. I don't play teams. But, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? So I might be a hidden.
Mm-hmm.
I might be a hidden. I'm not going to say that because it might be bad for me, but I'm just kidding.
Well, no, I mean the thing is that like Republicans do the exact same thing. They whenever they're campaigning, they will lie and say that they're in favor of protecting pre-existing conditions. They will flat out lie to pretend that they are progressive on certain issues that are so incredibly unpopular that they can't take the opposite position on it. Um, and so I don't. Basically, the problem is I think that if we were in like a democracy, which was maybe less partisan. Oh, that's one of the things I was going to mention. Like the level of partisanship in this country is so incredible. There was this one statistic from 538, which I thought was I thought it was funny anyway. Is that people they did a follow up survey. So they asked people in 2012, hey, what is your race? What is your gender? What is your like? Are you Hispanic or not? And then what is your partisan affiliation? People who stayed Republican from 2012 to 2016, a significant portion of people who reported being Black or Hispanic in 2012 were no longer Black or Hispanic in 2016. So the options either are one, they like somehow transitioned race, which I'm totally okay with, or two, more likely that they change their like racial and personal identity like labels to align with their partisan identity labels. Because one of the things that we know is actually that partisan identity labels are often stronger than almost anything else. They're stronger than people's like gender identity. They're stronger than people. Oh, and that was the reverse thing. Democrats who reported they were straight were like significantly more likely to become gay. Now that one could be like a genuine change, but the magnitude of the change is very unlikely. So in short, the point is like people, in short, the summary is partisan politics, partisan identity is so strong that people literally change their identity to meet their politics. So
Yeah, people barely change, and that's a really scary thing for democracy, and it really makes you question where things are going to align in the future. But on the point about people on the right, like, you never are ever going to have a politician come out and say, "Hello, I am here to represent the fascist party." Like, you're never going to get
Mhm.
that, but they are going to be that. Like, I think that's a good thing to be for Democrats. Advocate for these issues as a typical Democrat, because of course all these labels are going to be distorted in almost everybody's head. I think socialism is about as favorable as capitalism is within the Democratic Party currently, which is a freaking huge win. If if we're
Sure. Yeah,
considering
no,
where
absolutely.
American politics really is right now. I know people bring up like Europe. I tell people, like, okay, I know Europe is here. I know Europe is more to the left. I don't care. I'm talking about America and Americans. I don't care, Mike from PA. Like, I don't.
But I will just say you do sound really bad. It's okay though. He is pretty frustrating.
No,
Um,
I just think it's funny.
well, so I guess my argument is, I think that were we in like a less politically charged, particularly if we had like voting reform, which tended to like encourage moderate candidates, if we had a bunch of, if we were had less partisan politics, um, then I think that like being I think that basically right now being open with like certain policies is just not politically viable. And so you see it from Republicans. And because there are realistically only two options in the vast, vast, vast majority of elections, um, then the choice is basically either you compete against the Republican who lies and says he's in favor of workers' rights. He says he's in favor of the everyman. He says he's in favor of like protecting gay rights. He says he's in favor of protecting what pre-existing conditions, and in reality he's against all of these things. I think that to some extent they aren't playing fair. So if you care about politics, if you care about actual achieving like power and pursuing goals that benefit like all these marginalized groups, you have to be willing to play on a more fair playing field. You have to be able to say messaging that you generally what I think it is like oftentimes what you'll say is true. It's just not like the whole truth. You'll say, "Oh, I'm just in favor of increasing unionization or something." It's true. I am in favor of increasing unionization. I am in favor of $15 minimum wage. I might be in favor of other things as well, but those are a subset of things I believe in. So it's not technically a lie.
Yeah, I love that Bernie Sanders joke when he said, "We're not going to nationalize Google today, but or my first day in office, but maybe the second." I love those jokes because Bernie Sanders in the closet is thinking, "Okay, we need complete dictatorship of the proletariat." Like, he's saying all that stuff. But yeah, I think him. Do you know who? Have you ever heard of John Fetterman by chance from Pennsylvania?
The Pennsylvania lieutenant
Lieutenant
governor. I
Governor.
remember
He
hearing about
is,
him.
if anybody, for whoever's watching, he is, if you look him up, he is the prototype of what we need. A big, scruff man with a beard. He's 6'5", I think. His
He's
wife,
enormous.
yeah, his wife is an immigrant. I mean, she actually got a lot of threats recently, but his wife is a immigrant. Like, he is the prototype of what people consider a masculine working man that could be progressive and show people that, like, and of course, like, even with farming, the agrarian roots that farming came from in America, bringing that stuff back, like, just look him up. He is the prototype. He's what I strive to be for politics. If we had a million of him, oh my goodness, we would get so many good things done just because of the personal relationship people have, with politics. We'd get so many working class people back. And part of it really is like, if I when I do run in 2022, I will run as a Democrat, but I'm still going to be saying I'm not a Democrat and that I'm really upset with Democrats for becoming a party of the elites. We just, let's start with
I
you,
guess I'm
Juice.
not
I
so
don't
sure
know.
about that one. Actually, I definitely think that you should say that you're. I think take the exact opposite position. You should say you're a Democrat. You should absolutely enter into the party, and you should like kowtow to that.
I'm the
Just
real
because,
Democrat.
well, no, literally say like I'm taking the Democratic Party has been taken over by the establishment. Okay, I'm the real Democratic Party. Literally, yes, literally.
I am the real Democratic Party. That's what I'm like Joe Biden said. I am the Democratic Party. Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
I'm gonna talk like that, of course, and I will be documenting that stuff on my channel and my experiences. Usually, this stuff doesn't work. It's usually just like a I don't. It's not hobbyism. Of course, it's going to be a real change. But so in my current district, the Republican has been an incumbent for 20 years. He won every election 70 to 30 with very bad
Mhm.
competition. My goal is basically to not tell anybody I'm running. I'm not going to make any announcements. I'm literally just going to go person to person, get signatures, because you need signatures to run. Do like a little bit of a sneak attack thing. Like this is, all the stuff we've been working on, and I say we as a collective on the online left. All of this stuff, trying to organize it into a way to get the most appeal as possible, to get people on our side, to get people fighting for themselves, like getting workers to know their own worth. Some of the main normie arguments, okay? For like Jeff Bezos, I hear all the time from a bunch of poor people, oh, he worked to get that. Just bring up, oh, he owns more than 250 million people. You mean all the police officers, all the doctors, all the firefighters, all the teachers, all the janitors? You bring up every freaking profession you could think of, that, and it makes people question where the value system really lies. And when it comes to stuff like, social workers getting paid so little, and for police issues, frame legalizing marijuana and police reform as a way to make it safer for police. This is a pro-police thing we want. If we got what we wanted done, we would make police officers safer. And that's the argument we should be coming with. But I know we have a lot of bias against officers for many reasons. But yeah.
Well, something I would like, I basically take this position. So I think if you have the time, reading Politics for Power, really good book, solidly recommend it. One of its arguments, and this is something that I have agreed with for a long time, is working within the party is probably easier than working without it. One of the things that they point to consistently as examples of a successful grassroots organization is where basically he points to this as like a loophole. I don't know how else to put it. So usually if you set up a district Democratic Party in your state, the state party will give you an enormous amount of funding, not like enormous, but like, I don't know, $10,000 or something, which is enormous from the perspective of like having zero. And they will like give you aid. They will like let you get access to their voter database, which enormously helps out like getting out the vote and so on. There's all these sort of like access things that you get that you can't get if you run as an independent. So I don't know your particular district, and I can't speak to what's the most effective way in your district. But I will just note that they point to this like vast series of anecdotes of basically using district Democratic parties and grassroots organizations long before people actually run for office to get votes out and change people's minds. And it is highly effective. So
yeah,
give it a read.
thank you for doing this and all that, and having these conversations. And like I said, and when I first messaged you, like it's refreshing to see people who aren't just being cheerleaders. Like it's so easy to say we need Medicare for all, we need Green New Deal. It's really hard, and you're probably not going to be as successful as a content creator if you do this. If people usually don't listen to critical people. If you're critical online, that's typically a really bad way to get a following. If you're like really critical into policy and into detail and stuff, and like hearing somebody who considers themselves a socialist, who isn't like living in some type of like other country that I don't know about, is so refreshing. And hearing about even Vosh doing stuff like that, people like Destiny taking the online politics going in person to going to Atlanta.
Yeah, no, that was very exciting.
All you like, and that's why I think Destiny is definitely an ally in what we're doing. But like all of you guys who are like actually doing this, it's refreshing to see, because I was losing hope for a while. I was just watching Jimmy Dore, Kyle Kalinske, Rising, and all that stuff, really upset and emotional about Bernie Sanders losing the primary. And it's hard to go past those emotions and to think really pragmatically. But we're gonna be getting it done.
Well, so I guess we've reached about the 1 hour mark. This might be like a decent place to wrap up a little bit.
Yep.
If you'd be okay with that, and we can always go on for more, but I want to try and respect my bedtime, so I don't want to go too late. So why don't you, if you had to give everyone in this chat one takeaway from the stream, like one thing that they could do personally to change their lives, or one thing that they could do to change their rhetoric or advocacy to be more effective as leftists, what would that be? And then also at the end, I'm going to make you plug your channel again. So what will be the one change first?
My big thing is bring it back to the reality, not the reality TV show. If somebody says we can't get something done, say, you're being a politician, I'm being a patriot. We need to reclaim patriotism, not nationalism, but we need to reclaim patriotism. If we say something critical about America, we're not hating America. We're the ones that like America, because we actually want to make America better. We actually want to make America great again. And yeah, keep on bringing that out. And my channel on YouTube is called Jolah, Jolah, and also on Twitch, I'm a great gamer. Jolah Games, Jolah Games, on Twitch, and also Twitter and all that stuff. I don't care about Twitter. I'm probably going to delete it since I'm running for something anyway. So
Oh, fair enough. All right. Well, then I will link to your YouTube in the chat. Pog for leftist patriotism. Okay.
Yep.
What's it? And thank you very much for streaming with me. And I really appreciate your time, Jolah.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Goodbye. All right.